If you've been struggling with weight gain, sluggishness, or changing metabolism, I have a free gift for you that is going to be a game changer. I want to offer you my free, no excuses, light and easy lunch guide to boost midlife metabolism. Inside this ebook, you'll not only get tons of simple and doable meal planning how-tos and tips, you'll get my favorite, quick, ridiculously delicious recipes. And you'll also receive my exact 3-step formula to guide your food choices so you'll know exactly what to put on your plate. Boosting your energy and feeling lighter doesn't have to be hard, and I'm going to prove it to you with this free guide. You can get the instant download using the link below. It's only going to be available for a limited time, so be sure to grab it before it goes away. Welcome to Boss Body, the podcast where successful women learn how to lose weight and get healthy in a way they can live forever. If you're successful in so many areas of your life, but can't seem to give yourself the same care and compassion you show everyone else, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Sarah Haas, women's weight loss and body love coach, and I'm here to help you create the light, joyful, energetic life you deserve. Hello, welcome everybody. This is the Boss Body Podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Haas. I'm so happy that you're with me today. I have an amazing guest today. Amy Lindner Lesser is here with us, and we're going to be talking about grief. And some of the things that we discuss when you think of grief may surprise you because grief really has a wider definition than a lot of us might realize. A lot of us have gone through grief for sure. I don't think anyone can escape grief at some point, having that hit you at some point. But Amy is a grief recovery method specialist and a certified life transition coach. So she works with women and helps them deal with those emotions of loss and grief that arise in midlife. And they really come along with these major transitions that we're going through, right? Some of those are like loss of a loved one, or when we experience major life shifts, maybe a job change or a relationship change or a health challenge. And Amy's also the host of the podcast In with two N's, Introspection, Grief to Growth. So Amy, I'm so happy you're here with me today, and I'm so happy that you're going to talk about this subject that a lot of us struggle with and don't know how to deal with. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah. I'm thrilled that you decided to bring such a tough topic to your podcast.
It can be a tough topic, yes. And, grief doesn't feel good, right? It's something that we kind of want to sweep under the rug. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, sort of processing those emotions. But I would love first to get to know you a little bit better and have the listeners hear a little bit about your story and how did grief and helping women navigate through it become such a passion of yours?
Okay. Well, I went to graduate school to be a social worker. I knew that I always wanted to work with people and to help people. And in my years of social work, I worked with families who were dealing with the disruption of a family because of child abuse or neglect. Sometimes it led to adoption. So I was working with both adoptive parents and birth parents on giving up their children for placement. And then from there, I worked in home health care, where I dealt mostly with an older population, definitely a sick population, and was part of starting a hospice program. And I trained all the volunteers for that. And then I moved to working in a large hospital system, again, dealing with the 65, or actually in this case, it was 55 plus population. And I did programs for them, mostly educational, on all kinds of things. Then my late husband and I bought a bed and breakfast, an inn, which is why introspection is spelt with two N's. It's definitely still very near and dear to my heart, is the
I love
traditional
that.
world. We bought the inn in 1996, and 2.5 years later, my husband passed away from metastatic melanoma. It was 2 days before my 43rd birthday. He was 48, and all of a sudden, I found myself a widow, a single parent. My kids were 11 and 14 at the time, and I was running a 20-room bed and breakfast.
Wow.
And I would say for 5 or 6 years, maybe even a little longer, all I did was put one foot in front of the other. I thought I had dealt with my grief and the loss of my husband, which I much later found out, nope, all I did was squish it down and ignore it. I didn't dream for close to 8 years. You know, if you asked me what my aspirations were or what my hopes were for the future, I had no idea. I couldn't think that far in the future. It took everything to just stay and manage each day. And then I ended up being the caregiver for my mother and my stepfather for a few years while I was running the inn and parenting. My
Wow.
my mother and stepfather died 3 months apart in 2017 and 2018. Um, then we hit COVID, and running the inn was not really possible because the state closed us down because we weren't essential. And I was like, okay, now what do I do? And I ended up doing a lot of not podcasts, Facebook Lives, trying to keep our guests knowing that we were still around. And then in December of 2020, I had just had a retreat at the inn where we did something called strategic meditation, which is going sort of into a semi sleeping state and basically imagine what your life would be like or what was going on. And it was narrated so that you didn't have to think or dream on your own completely. And I remember coming out of that and telling everybody, oh, it was great. I dreamt I was in Mexico again, and I was sitting in a square, and there was music, and there were lots of people around, and it was wonderful. Too bad it's not going to happen because I have the inn. My younger daughter had just had a baby. I wasn't going anywhere. And that was the beginning of December, right before Christmas. I was alone in the inn, and the front doorbell rang. So I went to the door, and there was a man I recognized who was a realtor. And he said, "Are you looking to sell?" And I said, "Well, no." And then I heard that voice in the back of my head saying, "Amy, don't be a fool. Every business is for sale if the price is right." And so I said, "Well, I'm not looking to sell, but if you have buyers, I will be happy to entertain, you know, and let them come through and we can talk, and who knows what'll happen." And because I wasn't attached to the outcome, I was happy. I loved my guest. I loved what I was doing. I also knew that I was getting very close. I was going to turn 65 that summer. And I'm like, well, let's see, I'm going to have to retire at some point. And they came, they looked, they made an offer. I laughed at them. I told them they weren't even a block away from, they were so far away from the entrance to the gate. They walked out of the room, they came back, they raised the price. I said, "You're getting closer, but you're still not in the ballpark." And they said, "Okay, we'll get back to you after the weekend." And on Sunday, the realtor called me with an offer that I knew I couldn't say no to. And so I sold my inn, um, and I was out of there in 3 months after almost 25 years. Moved away out of Massachusetts to New York State and thought, okay, I did training during COVID to take my social work and become a coach because I hadn't renewed my social work license and I didn't want to do 25 years worth of continuing ed to get it back. So I got certified as a coach and started coaching innkeepers, only to see that most innkeepers don't see a problem with how they live their lives. And innkeepers, like many women, are people pleasers, that we want everybody else to be happy and forget to think about ourselves, which is why self-care is one of my big rallying cries. Um, then in the summer of 2022, my best friend of 44 years passed away. She had been ill, so it wasn't a surprise, but it didn't matter. It was a huge loss. We had met the first day of graduate school.
Wow.
And I remember standing with my two daughters in Maryland at her brother's house while there was a memorial service for her. And I'm looking out at this beautiful river. It was a pastoral setting. And I said, I can't let Liz's passing go without honoring her in some way. And that's when I said, I'm going to help other people deal with loss and grief. And right after that, I read a book and it talked about life quakes, which I define as normal life changes, life transitions on steroids. That, normally we can handle things and then something big comes and it sort of knocks us down. And it said that when we hit midlife, most people will go through one life quake every 7 years. So I'm like, okay, let me see. I did accounting, and in about 60 years, no, yeah, in 60 years, I had gone through 30 life quakes.
Oh my goodness.
And those were just human losses. That didn't count losing pets who were near and dear to me. It didn't count getting health diagnoses. One of the reasons we moved and bought an inn was that I was diagnosed as being a diabetic. My husband had the melanoma. Um, it didn't count the loss from moving or changing careers, leaving all of our friends. And I'm like, okay. And then I started looking at all the jobs I had had, and I'm like, look, they all sort of form this really nice line leading me right into grief and loss.
Well, that is a very powerful story. And I want to say, my goodness, I'm so sorry for those losses, those tremendous losses that you have been through. It's a lot. I can't imagine the loss of your husband in your 40s because it comes out of nowhere and just like that's a life quake in and of itself, much less now you're running a business on your own, you have children that you are raising, adding to that, taking care of your parents. That is tremendous. And I can completely understand being sort of paralyzed. Grief has a way of shutting you down. It's just it takes up so much mental energy, emotional energy that you said you just, you're putting one foot in front of the other just to do the basics, the bare
We,
minimum.
we sleepwalk for a while.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
And
absolutely. Absolutely. And, I thought it was really interesting. You touched on you've had a lot of loss, a lot of, people that were close to you passing away. But I like that you don't just put grief in that little box because we as humans do experience these life quakes. I know very well. I have a son, my younger son. I have a daughter and a son. My son's the youngest. He just graduated, he's going off to college this fall, and I am grieving. I am grieving so hard him moving out and the kids being an empty nester. That is a huge life shift for me. And I've been through a divorce after 17 years. I had breast cancer. There's all these things that, in addition to, I lost my dad when I was only in my late 30s to lung cancer. You know, we all experience these things and we don't really know what to do with it. We don't know how to really deal with it. Thinking about it just seems to bring you down. And so I think a lot of us tend to try to tune it out and avoid it. And I really think that that's one of the reasons that women struggle with carrying extra weight, because a lot of us we deal with tough emotions in different ways, and eating is one of those ways. Workaholic is another. Shopping online is another. Drinking too much alcohol. There's a lot of ways we deal with it, but in my work, I see food. And that, to me, that represents a stuffing down of the emotions. And so what I'm hearing you say is you went to that retreat and you took a minute to go inside. So that introspection, how did that become the catalyst for releasing these emotions? Because I know people that are listening are thinking, okay, that's great. She was able to put that, not behind you. You never just forget about it, but she was able to move on and find joy again and start living the life she wanted instead of just existing. So what would you say to people who are dealing with that, but who don't really know what to do with it?
My advice is to, number one, feel all your feelings. Grief is normal, it's natural, and it's necessary. That we only feel grief when we lose something that's important to us. If it wasn't important, we'd move on as if nothing happened. So allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to laugh. And it's okay to have conflicting emotions happening basically at the same time. I think as a society, and I'm going to say that the US and probably Canada, I'm not sure about places in Europe, are probably the two worst places for expressing grief. That we tend, because other people, and I'm going to say I'm other people, we're uncomfortable watching somebody cry or feeling sad. So we shut them down. It's like, don't cry, you'll get over it. Or if it's a pet, for example, you'll get another pet, but it's not going to be the same pet that just died. Certainly, we can't replace people with other people. We can maybe fall in love again, but who we fall in love with is not the person who passed or the person we were divorced from. The other is to take time for self-care. That's really important. And self-care, if you're somebody who stuffs, could be eating the foods that are healthier for you and that are better for your body, that won't add to your misery. So, not stuffing down all the chips that make you feel fat and bloated and, yucky. Walk, find an exercise to get you out, not to get out of your head, but to get the energies in your body moving. I've just started practicing Reiki, and Reiki is a wonderful practice to help people move energies, including grief, from their body. And that takes no effort really on the client's part, just to sit and relax. Eventually, you want to look for the silver linings in things. Everything has a silver lining. It has a lesson for us. We we have to get far enough away so that we can look at something um, objectively. When we're in the immediate time of grief, we can't do that. But we need to learn to get out of the victim mindset and into the thriving mindset. And for everybody, grief is different. And even for each thing you grieve, your grief will be different. The amount of time you grieve, the extent to which you grieve, it's all different. Siblings who lose a parent are going to have very different grief responses because their relationships with that parent are different.
I
You
like
mentioned,
what, go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned your son graduating and going off to college and you feeling grief over the empty nest. I recorded a podcast yesterday for myself talking about graduation. And I talked about how a young woman who's, I'm going to say she's in her mid 20s, just got her doctorate. It just left her parents' home, even though she's been away at college and graduate school, but she moved out of her parents' home to her own home in another state to start a new job. And she's grieving. And she didn't even know that that's grief. So I'm sure her parents are grieving. She's grieving, just like your son is probably, although he may not let you know it, being a teenager, that he's grieving, leaving the familiarity of home, leaving the security of mom and home, and being a little scared of what he's going to face first time away, just as you're grieving having him home all the time, having another body in the house, someone to talk to, someone to laugh with, someone to say, "Oh, look what happened today,"
Yeah,
and to
it's so
acknowledge.
true because, yeah, we're experiencing all these emotions. And like you said, in our society, you feel like you're wallowing in your sorrow. And I know my instinct is to get busy, to do things. That's how I deal with uncomfortable emotions. It's, work or take on a project at home or go help somebody else who's dealing with something, which these can be good things, but I love that you're pointing out that energy is in there and it needs to flow through. I just love that image. That really resonates with me because that truly, you can feel it in your chest. You can feel it in your heart, that energy just sitting heavy. And not that the grief will completely ever disappear, but you don't have to hold all of that in. And I love what you said about, what? The first step is self-care, like identify what it is you're not doing for yourself that you need. Maybe it's rest or downtime. Maybe it's eating more nutritious foods. Maybe it's taking walks. And I think we feel guilty. We feel guilty giving ourselves what we actually deserve. And you mentioned the victim mindset. I think there's a misconception that if you're grieving, you're acting like a victim. Can you speak to that for a second?
Well, I think the reality is we tend to think of things happening to us as opposed to happening for us. And that's a really hard um, twist to make on so and so died, because how can that be happening for me? Certainly, it wasn't a positive experience. However, I can tell you that when my husband passed away, I learned to live alone. I learned to be strong and to love myself and love my own company. I probably would never have done that if I always had him there with me. Um, I developed much more self confidence.
Yeah, that's so
So
true.
there was a silver lining.
Yeah, there is a silver lining in everything, no matter how devastating it feels. Not that that's a good thing, not that you're like, "Oh, yay, I'm glad that happened to me because now I'm a stronger person." But I know everything that I've gone through has changed me profoundly and has changed the way, not only the way I feel about myself, but the way I go about things in the world and the way that I work with my clients and the lessons I feel like I've learned that I can share with others. You're so right. These do happen for you. It's not, if you look at it from a universal perspective, from an eternal perspective, kind of like you were saying, once you get a little distance, you may not be able to do that for a good while. But once you get the distance from it and you think about losing people is a fact of life. People will eventually lose you. There's no way around it. And there's a reason that it's part of life. I believe everything that happens while we're here on earth is for a reason. That's why the cycle continues. That's why it is the way it is. And if you can look at it more from that perspective, everything is happening for us, not to us. It's not a punishment. It's not it's not
Exactly.
because we aren't good or it's not because we didn't, do this or that and eh, we can get stuck in that, why me and this isn't fair because it doesn't seem like it. It doesn't seem like it at the time.
And as my mother used to say to me, who said life was fair?
Mhm. Yeah.
You said you said two things. Let's see if I can remember them. Um, I want to go back to the self care. As women, especially those of us who are in midlife and beyond, we were raised thinking self care is selfish, and
Mhm.
it's but as much as I hate thinking about the airlines being right, when the stewardesses, like flight attendants, when they say, if the air masks drop, put yours on first. You've got to take care of yourself before anyone else. You can't you can't pour from an empty cup or an empty pot. And that's really true. And then you talked about pushing down some of your feelings by doing things or doing things for others. It's not bad. It gets us out of ourselves, and that's okay as long as it's done within moderation. Everything needs to be moderated, and maybe it's one task that you do each day, whether it's for yourself or for someone else, that gets you out of feeling woe is me, poor pitiful me. And eventually you get to a point where staying in your depression and your misery and your grief is harder than the idea of moving forward. And that's when coaching is perfect. I'm in the process of developing what I'm calling inspiration cards. And of course, inspiration is spelt with the two N's, but they are affirmations on one side and an action on another, specifically um, focused on grief and loss. So some of the actions are take a friend out to lunch, prepare a healthy dinner for yourself and or a friend. Go read to someone in a nursing home. You don't have to know them. You can go in and say, can I come in this week? Go to an animal shelter and pet an animal. Give the love that you can't give to the person who's passed, give it to an animal. Um, if you have small children or a neighbor or a grandchild, spend time with them. They can they can teach us so much about showing emotions and being um, authentic with their emotions. One of the other things that helped me was a medium who I know, who's a friend, said that, you know, each of us, well, obviously, we are souls having a physical experience in the body that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have soul contracts. And, we're talking about, I lost something, it's punishment to me, but maybe it's the soul contract for that other person, that they have lived their soul contract and it meant that they needed to move on. They were there in your life for a certain reason or a season, and now it's time to move on. The other thing is believing that everything is energy and energy doesn't disappear, it doesn't die, helps me, and I know it helps many others, to still conduct conversations with the people who have been important to us. I know I talk to my father, my mother, my husband, my friend, all the time. Sometimes I yell, sometimes I ask for signs, and sometimes I just share. Journaling is one of those things that I have found for my clients as well as for me to be amazing. Every year on New Year's Eve, I write in a journal and I write a letter to my husband. And I tell him about my year. And obviously, if I can remember it by New Year's Eve, it was an important event. If I can't remember it, it wasn't that important. And I've now started, my religious tradition is that you light a candle on somebody's death anniversary. And I fought against that because I don't want to remember the day they died. So I light it on their birthday because I'm grateful that they were in my life for as long as they were. And so anybody can do that.
I love that. I love all those practices are just beautiful. And the perspective that you've shared, looking at it as, we all have a contract. We're all here for a reason and we're all here for a specified amount of time. And we don't get to choose it, but it's what's meant to be for us and for others, and that we're all energy. So they're not gone. The energy has just shifted into they've transitioned. And I just think that's amazing. So I know that you have a resource that people can grab, which is the 7 phases to navigating life's transitions with mindfulness, grace, and compassion. And that's a free guide that if listeners are experiencing grief, want to learn more about how to let that move through them and how to view it from a different perspective, can you tell us where they can find that guide?
They can find it on my website, which is introspection, INN, introspection.com/free guide.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Amy. It has been wonderful having you. And, I love when we can shift our mindset and be able to enjoy life because it helps us see things from a different way and it helps us move on. All the things that you've shared, I just feel like are amazing and so valuable. And you're just a beautiful soul. And I'm so grateful to you for being on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking with you and look forward to hearing from some of your listeners, hopefully.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you all for being here and for tuning in. And until next time, I will see you then. Thank you so much for being here. I'm honored that you've chosen to spend your time with me and allowed me to be part of your journey. If you like what you're hearing, remember to subscribe to the podcast and share it with anyone you think would benefit. I'll see you soon.